Okay, good evening. Tonight we're going to start with a couple of different kinds of poetry, and hopefully we'll get to uh, Thomas Pynchon books because um, he writes novels, but in fact they're really long poems, or they're just massive works that have lots of different poems that are really difficult to classify. Um, the last one I read a couple of different things. Hart Crane, which I think is a really big influence on Thomas Pynchon. And I read a couple of different poems. Herman Melville, a chapter from Moby Dick, and Frank O'Hara, and shoot, who else did I read? Ezra Pound. And I didn't really mention this in the last one, but I should have. That Ezra Pound was famous for a literary movement that he was involved in called Imagism, which sought to kind of like create your work of poetry and stuff, and then cut away at it until just the images were there. It was apparently, when I've read it, heavily influenced from um, Japanese poetry. Okay, so tonight let's start. Let's start with this is some poems from the 1800s. All right, not that one. Okay. So this is from Samuel Taylor Coleridge, Romanticism. And if you've never read any romantic poems, they're heavily influenced on imagination. Imagination over form, over concrete structure or straightforwardness. You just want to, well, I don't know. They're all very different, you know. People also call John Milton's Paradise Lost another kind of romantic poem. Actually, I had a professor once who told me that all romantic works are in competition with Paradise Lost. It, I, he was a pretty smart guy. I think he was probably onto something with that. So this is just one of the best, called Kubla Khan by Samuel Taylor Coleridge. In Xanadu did Kubla Khan a stately pleasure dome decree, where Alph, the sacred river, ran through caverns measureless to man down to a sunless sea. So twice 5 miles of fertile ground, with walls and towers, were girdled round, and there were gardens bright with sinuous rills, where blossomed many an incense-bearing tree, and here were forests ancient as the hills, enfolding sunny spots of greenery. But oh, that deep, romantic chasm which slanted down the green hill athwart a cedarn cover, a savage place, as holy and enchanted as ever beneath waning moon was haunted by woman wailing for her demon lover. And from this chasm, with ceaseless turmoil seething, as if this earth, in vast thick pants, were breathing, a mighty fountain momently was forced, amid whose swift half intermitted burst, huge fragments vaulted like rebounding hail, or chafy grain beneath the thresher's flail. And mid these dancing rocks, at once and ever, it flung up momently the sacred river, 5 miles meandering in a mazy motion through wood and dale. The sacred river ran, then reached the caverns measureless to man, and sank in tumult to a lifeless ocean. And mid this tumult Kubla heard from far ancestral voices prophesying war. The shadow of the dome of pleasure floated midway on the waves, where was heard the mingled measure from the fountain in the caves. It was a miracle of rare device, a sunny pleasure dome with caves of ice. A damsel with a dulcimer in a vision once I saw. It was an Abyssinian maid, and on her dulcimer she played, singing of Mount Abor. Could I revive within me her symphony and song, to such a deep delight 'twould win me, that with music loud and long I would build that dome in air, that sunny dome, those caves of ice, and all who heard should see them there, and all should cry, beware, beware! His flashing eyes, his floating hair, weave a circle round him thrice, and close your eyes with holy dread, for he on honeydew hath fed and drunk the milk of paradise. Just, uh, you know, a vision full of just like incredible language. So full of imagination. It would be impossible to plan out something like this. Coleridge was actually famous for um, writing a lot, but also his criticism was of other poetry and just art and literature in general is exceptional. He was a very, very smart guy. Fortunately, he had a drug problem, and some of his work kind of uh, he took opium and really did a number on him. Probably would have lived a lot longer if he didn't. Um, but it's hard not to see and read something like this and not, it's just like what an incredible vision that he has in this one, and it's full of nightmare and it's full of life and it's just epic from start to finish. It's really an incredible work. Um, yeah, very very few poems like that. Um, yeah, that's definitely one of the best ones. I was gonna read more of these guys. This book is all about romantic. It's a very old romantic book from. It has just about everything in it, which there are so many great um, romantic poems. And when I say romantic, I don't mean that they're about love. It's the movement Romanticism, which um, was in the late 1700s, and it was kind of a response to the Enlightenment, and people argue over and over what these movements were and what they meant. But from what I've kind of grown to understand about it, it's the Enlightenment has an idea that you can kind of look at reality and understand it. You can do what you got to do and come to straightforward conclusions on what reality means. And Romanticism didn't like that. They said that um, you don't know when you're awake, you don't know when you're dreaming. Um, Imagination, not reality, is where God lies. But that when you're dealing with tons and tons of different authors working at a different time, there were probably neoclassical writers who felt that way already. But as a whole, that's kind of what it goes. And in the beginning, it's more optimistic about human nature, and in the end of the Romantic period, you start to see some darker works. And Coleridge, I would kind of put in the middle of that. Um, Maybe even the darker ones, even. But Wordsworth and Blake seem to have a lot of trust. They're a lot more like Ralph Waldo Emerson. That to think that it's just like, oh, you just need, you just have faith in yourself, have faith in your imagination, everything will work out right. We'll build a kind of utopia about about it, and the other people like Byron, Keats, and Shelley, and probably Coleridge too, would say that that was exactly the opposite. On the American side, you'd have Walt Whitman, who would uh, um, definitely be an American romantic writer. Herman Melville, um, Hawthorne, his short stories and his novels, and Edgar Allan Poe, definitely on the darker side. So this one is from John Keats, and it's called "To Sleep." O soft embalmer of the still midnight, shutting with careful fingers and benign, our gloom-pleased eyes, embowered from the light, enshaded in forgetfulness divine. O soothest sleep, if so it please thee, close in midst of this thine hymn my willing eyes, or wait the Amen ere thy poppy throws around my bed its lulling charities. Then save me, or the past day will shine upon my pillow, breeding many woes. Save me from curious conscience that still lords its strength for darkness, burrowing like a mole. Turn the key deftly in the oiled wards and seal the hushed casket of my soul. Um, See, this is one of the reasons that I don't like to classify uh, things because, like, if you think about Shakespeare, he was tragedy and comedy, and so like the darker ideas, like the writers who tend to be stressing death um, more so, like Keats, you just read, the starts with "O soft embalmer" and ends with "hushed casket." It's the death, and dark kind of meditations, the darker subjects, are all in Shakespeare, who predates all the Romantics and who predates the Enlightenment as well. So, you got to understand, you got to kind of like look at these things in a general way. But this is a really good one from Keats called Ode to a Nightingale. My heart aches, and a drowsy numbness pains my sense, as though of hemlock I had drunk, or emptied some dull opiate to the drains. 1 minute passed, and the leth wards had sunk. 'Tis not through envy of thy happy lot, but being too happy in thy happiness, that thou, light-winged dryad of the trees, in some melodious plot of beech and green, in shadows numberless, singest of summer in full-throated ease. Oh, for a drought of vintage that hath been cooled a long age in the deep delft earth, tasting of Flora and the country green, dance and provincial song and sunburnt mirth. Oh, for a beaker full of the warm south, full of the true, the blushful hippocrene, with beaded bubbles winking at the brim and purple-stained mouth. What I might drink and leave the world unseen, and with thee fade away into the forest dim. Fade far away, dissolve, and quite forget what thou among the leaves hast never known. The weariness, the fever, and the fret, here where men sit and hear each other groan, where palsy shakes a few sad last gray hairs, where youth grows pale and spectre thin and dies, where but to think is to be full of sorrow, and leaden-eyed despairs, where beauty cannot keep her lustrous eyes, or new love pine at them beyond tomorrow. Away, away, for I will fly to thee, not charioted by Bacchus and his pards, but on the viewless wings of poesy. Though the dull brain perplexes and retards, already with thee, tender is the night, and happily the queen moon is on her throne, clustered around by all her starry phase. But here there is no light, save what from heaven is with breezes blown through verdurous glooms and winding mossy ways. I cannot see what flowers are at my feet, nor what soft incense hangs upon the boughs, but an embalmed darkness guess each sweet wherewith the seasonable month endows the grass, the thicket, and the fruit tree wild, white hawthorn, and the pastoral eglantine, fast fading violets covered up in trees, and mid-May's eldest child, the musk rose, full of dewy wine, the murmurous haunt of flies on summer eves. Darkling, I listen, and for many a time I have been half in love with easeful death, called him soft names in many a mused rhyme, to take into the air my quiet breath. Now more than ever seems it rich to die, to cease upon the midnight with no pain, while thou art pouring forth thy soul abroad in such an ecstasy. Still wouldst thou sing, and I have ears in vain, to thy high requiem become a sod. Thou was not born for death, immortal bird, no hungry generations tread thee down. The voice I hear this passing night was heard in ancient days by emperor and clown, perhaps the self-same song that found a path through the sad heart of Ruth, when sick for home she stood in tears amid the alien corn, the same that oft times hath charmed magic casements, opening on the foam of perilous seas and fairylands forlorn. Forlorn, the very word is like a bell to toll me back from thee to my sole self. Adieu, the fancy cannot cheat so well as she is famed to do. Deceiving elf, adieu, adieu, thy plaintive anthem fades past the near meadows, over the still stream, up the hillside, and now 'tis buried deep in the next valley glades. Was it a vision or a waking dream? Fled is that music. Do I wake or sleep? Jesus, so full of imagination, so full of uh, an incredible gift that um, you really haven't seen before or since. You know, the closest you would get to would be uh, Shakespeare, but um, that just the works are just so perfect. Basically, the poem, simplest level, is about the hearing a nightingale bird. This guy is obviously depressed. Even the narrator of the poem is, I'd always think of Keats himself, but you don't necessarily have to think. It's just someone who's who's been through some suffering. Keats had lost his brother shortly before this, and there's a reference to that. Where youth grows pale and spectre thin and dies. His lost his brother to tuberculosis, and he died of the same thing not that long after he wrote this. Um, but he hears the nightingale's song, and he realizes that it's just this beautiful thing for him. You know, it's just offering him this comfort, this music, uh, and he realizes that it's immortal. Um, that it was heard so many generations back in human history and will be continued to be heard. And um, if I to explain any more than that right now, it probably won't come out too good. But I'm really just focusing on reading as much tonight as I possibly can. So the next one he wrote, I think, is a really good partner to this one. It's called Ode on a Grecian Urn. Thou still unravished bride of quietness, thou foster child of silence and slow time, sylvan historian who can thus express a flowery tale more sweetly than our rhyme, what leaf-fringed legend haunts about thy shape, of deities or mortals or of both, in temp or the dales of Arcady. What men or gods are these? What maidens loth, what mad pursuit, what struggle to escape, what pipes and timbrels, what wild ecstasy? Heard melodies are sweet, but those unheard are sweeter. Therefore, you soft pipes, play on, not to the sensual ear, but more endeared. Pipe to the spirit ditties of no tone. Fair youth, beneath the trees, thou canst not leave thy song, nor ever can those trees be bare. Bold lover, never, never canst thou kiss, though winning near the goal. Yet do not grieve, she cannot fade, though thou hast not thy bliss. Forever wilt thou love, and she be fair. Ah, happy, happy boughs that cannot shed your leaves, nor ever bid the spring adieu, and happy melodist unwearied, forever piping songs forever new. More happy love, more happy, happy love, forever warm and still to be enjoyed, forever panting and forever young. All breathing human passion far above, that leaves a heart high sorrowful and cloyed, a burning forehead and a parching tongue. Who are these coming to the sacrifice? To what green altar, O mysterious priest, leadest thou that heifer lowing at the skies? And all her silken flanks with garlands dressed? What little town by river or seashore, or mountain built with peaceful citadel, is emptied of its folk this pious morn? And little town, thy streets forevermore will silent be, and not a soul to tell why thou art desolate can ever return. O Attic shape, fair attitude, with breed of marble men and maidens overwrought, with forest branches and the trodden weed, thou, silent form, dost tease us out of thought, as doth eternity, cold pastoral. When old age shall this generation waste, thou shalt remain in midst of other woe. Then ours, a friend to man, to whom thou sayest, beauty is truth, truth beauty. That is all you know on earth, and all you need to know. Um, that one is about you looking at an old Greek urn, and I forget. I don't know exactly what. I feel like I probably used to know more about that poem, but basically the images on it are is what he's describing the lover um, chasing his lover, the trees, the priest leading the heifer to the sacrifice, um, and the men making the songs and the unheard melodies, how sweet they are. The fact that we don't know more specifics about the poem is what gives the poem, uh, what is really the cause of the poem. But it's just so beautiful. It's a very very influential poem on a lot of different writers. I know if you like Kurt Vonnegut, the book Cat's Cradle has a reference to it. I think it just says soft pipes play on, but that idea that heard melodies are sweet, but unheard melodies are sweeter. F. Scott Fitzgerald, the author of The Great Gatsby, was a huge fan of Keats and Byron, but yeah, I think he actually he has a ton of references throughout Keats in his work, and oh, excuse me, my back is in disarray. But he's a very very big fan of Keats, and oh my god, and The Great Gatsby has a lot of he tries to take his love of that poetry and just kind of carry it with his writing, and I think that's one of the most beautiful things about The Great Gatsby. Which actually, I have a couple of things from that. I could read some of that quick. The next, well, I'll read this one first, then I'll put this book away and I'll start moving to other things. But this one is called Osmandias, which another thing is just all over the place in pop culture. I saw if the Coen brothers, the Ballad of Buster Scruggs, this poem is read out loud in that. It's also the title of a Breaking Bad episode, um, and that show Mad Men. Actually, there was a character who directly said some lines from it, but it's another one that's just out of this world, And I love all these poems, but the reason I think they're so damn good is that they're totally unique, and they're really all an artist at just an incredible peak. There's someone who's just used their gift in such marvelous ways that um, that inspiration is really just really flowing through them. They're not screwing it up. They're just making these things that are really timeless and hard to classify and really hard to compare to other things because they're just so full of life and genius. So, Osmandias, but this is by Shelley, not by Keats. I met a traveler from an antique land who said, "Two vast and trunkless legs of stone stand in desert. Near them, on the sand, half sunk, a shattered visage lies, whose frown and wrinkled lip and sneer of cold command tell that its sculptor well those passions read which yet survived, stamped on these lifeless things, the hand that mocked them and the heart that fed, and on the pedestal these words appear: My name is Osmandias, King of Kings. Look on my works, ye mighty, and despair. Nothing beside remains round the decay of that colossal wreck, boundless and bare. The lone and level sands stretch far away." Okay, so I'm just going to read a couple passages I had from The Great Gatsby. I don't want to do that one. So this is from, if you're, you know, uh, maybe you like poetry, or maybe you like, beautiful language, or just good writing. Because I know a lot of people don't. They'll try to read something once, and they'll get frustrated with it. A lot of times in school, you're forced to read things, which is pretty terrible. If you can't, it's not a bad thing to have good books picked out for you, but to go into it blind and to not have someone who can adequately explain, why why it's a gift and not a task, that you're going to read it. It's it, it can really be a terrible thing, and ruin it for you for life. Um, so this is from the first chapter of The Great Gatsby. Just listen to the language of this. Inside, the crimson room bloomed with light. Tom and Miss Baker sat on either side of the long couch, and she read aloud to him from the Saturday Evening Post, the words, murmurous and uninflected, running together in a soothing tune. The lamplight, bright on his boots and dull on the autumn leaf yellow of her hair, glinted along the paper as she turned a page with a flutter of slender muscles in her arms. When we came in, she held us silent for a moment with a lifted hand. "To be continued," she said, tossing the magazine on the table, "in our very next issue." like that little scene, like there's so many scenes like that in The Great Gatsby. Just these beautiful descriptions of light and sound just playing with each other. Just like this joy of genius. This beauty of creation that you're seeing, and all the things that are great in life. you know, sex, joy, love, happiness. All of those things are embodied in poetry. And sorrow too. All right, this is from actually the same chapter. This is both from the first chapter. Um, all right. Already, it was deep summer on roadhouse roofs and in front of wayside garages, where new red gas pumps sat out in pools of light. And when I reached my estate at West Egg, I ran the car under its shed and sat for a while on an abandoned grass roller in the yard. The wind had blown off, leaving a loud, bright night, with wings beating in the trees and a persistent organ sound as the full bellows of the earth blew the frogs full of life. The silhouette of a moving cat wavered across the moonlight, and turning my head to watch it, I saw that I was not alone. 50 feet away, a figure had emerged from the shadow of my neighbor's mansion and was standing with his hands in his pockets, regarding the silver pepper of the stars. Something in his leisurely movements and the secure position of his feet upon the lawn suggested that it was Mr. Gatsby himself, come out to determine what share was his of our local heavens. I decided to call to him. Miss Baker had mentioned him at dinner, and that would do for an introduction. But I didn't call to him, for he had a sudden intimation that he was content, for he gave a sudden intimation that he was content to be alone. He stretched out his arms toward the dark water in a curious way, and far as I was from him, I could have sworn he was trembling. Involuntarily, I glanced seaward and distinguished nothing except a single green light, minute and far away, and that might have been the end of a dock. When I looked once more for Gatsby, he had vanished, and I was alone, again in the unquiet darkness. Oh, excuse me, this is Luna. Sorry. But, Fitzgerald, another person, just incredibly talented. His short stories are amazing. His books are all good. Very tragic figure. Struggled, you know. So many of these guys would have, just could have just been, could have just really run so much longer, if they didn't battle with different kinds of things. He had a hard life either way. Never really felt like he had made it as a writer. Never really, he made a lot of money in the beginning, and The Great Gatsby didn't do terribly, but it took him, I think, over 11 years to write the sequel to The Great Gatsby, or not his sequel, but his next book. And the guy, um, his wife had a lot of mental problems, and he drank a ton, really, and it's all through his life, and his daughter said something that I think was really, really smart, and he was like, she was saying that, I don't think my father drank because my mother was crazy, and I don't think my mother was crazy because my father drank. They're both just people. They're both just struggling with their problems. Doing their best, and for whatever reason, it's things, tragedy befalls them, and but that book will be around forever. It will always be read because the images just like start cascading down just over and over again. It really is probably one of the best books ever written. Um, all right, what's next? It's like Tennyson, um, Rudyard Kipling, uh, Browning. I'm looking for. Oh, here it is. Okay, Dover Beach by Matthew Arnold. This was written in 1851, so about 23 years later than Percy and Keats were writing. Um, Dover Beach. The sea is calm tonight. The tide is full. The moon lies fair upon the straits. On the French coast the light gleams and is gone. The cliffs of England stand glimmering and vast. Out in the tranquil bay. Come to the window. Sweet is the night air. Only from the long line of spray, where the sea meets the moon-blanched land. Listen. You hear the grating roar of pebbles which the waves draw back and fling. At their return, up the high strand, begin and cease, and then again begin, with tremulous cadence slow, and bring the eternal note of sadness in. Sophocles, long ago, heard it on the Aegean, and it brought into his mind the turbid ebb and flow of human misery. We find also in the sound of thought, hearing it by this distant northern sea. The sea of faith was once, too, at the full, and round earth's shore lay like the folds of a bright girdle furled. But now I only hear its melancholy, long, withdrawing roar, retreating to the breath of the night wind, down the vast edges drear and naked shingles of the world. Ah, love, let us be true to one another, for the world which seems to lie before us like a land of dreams, so various, so beautiful, so new, hath really neither joy, nor love, nor light, nor certitude, nor peace, nor help for pain. And we are here as on a darkling plain, swept with confused alarms of struggle and flight, where ignorant armies clash by night. Dover Beach is the beach on southern England, directly across the sea from France. And England and France have, have been in more wars than I even know. And I love history. I love reading about different stuff, you know, Napoleon's rises and, all the kinds of wars and, tragedy that involve in history I find incredibly fascinating. And that's what the poem is about, is that the wars have come and they will come back. But right now, the sea is at peace. We don't know when it's coming. It will come. So let us be true to one another. Let us let us take care of each other. Whether you're talking to your lover or a friend or your family or just a complete stranger, like the poet is writing to his audience. The world, that it's such a beautiful and heartbreaking ending to that story. Like when he says, "Let us be true, love. Let us be true to one another, for the world which seems to lie before us like a land of dreams." That's what it feels like at times of peace. So various, so beautiful, so new. That's that's what life really is. That's what it's supposed to be. That's what Eden is peace, where we're free to love one another, to not let our lives be ruined by the ignorance of hate, of violence and you know just just evil. So he's saying those things. But the world hath really neither joy, nor love, nor light, nor certitude, nor peace, nor help for pain. It's just, this line gets me every time. And we are here as on a darkling plain, swept with confused alarms of struggle and flight, where ignorant armies clash by night. Um, so, such an awesome poem. I'll go through it a little bit again. Just the images are so beautiful, but then he gets, he describes the bay, the sweet as the night air, the moon blanched land. But then he says, listen, you hear the grating roar. So the waves are, the tide is coming in, and the waves retreat. It's the sound. But when it retreats, you hear it. It's rushing back at you. That's what the poet hears. The violence is calm now, but it is coming back. At their return, up the high strand, begin and cease, and then again begin, with tremulous cadence slow, and bring the eternal note of sadness. And he says, Sophocles wrote Oedipus Rex, also Antigone. These incredibly human, great dramas that are all tragic. And that was the human misery. It's the eternal note of sadness. And but he says, we find also in the sound a thought, hearing it by this distant northern sea. Like right now, England and France. My entire lifetime, I don't think those two countries would ever go to war with one another. But it's happened before, you know, and it could happen again. And we're very blessed to live in a time of peace, and we need to hold on to that. It's a debt we owe to the dead. And he talks about the sea of faith and how um, at a time it did offer things uh, to people. I don't know as much about this as I wish I did. Read this poem a decent number of times, but the images are again so beautiful. Lay like the folds of a bright girdle furled. It's the music, the sounds, just playing with each other, just growing. It's so alive. The words, just so good. But now I only hear melancholy long withdrawing roar, retreating to the breath of the night wind. What a great line! Down the vast edges drear and naked shingles of the world. So just like when the waves are retreating, the pebbles, it's we're getting stripped of the bay, which he's already described as it's tranquil. It's the sea is calm tonight, but it won't always be. And you know, again, it's something we really need to appreciate. Poetry does. Like a great example is Byron. Who's one of the greatest, probably was the greatest poet ever, and he was in a war and he was killed. And tons of great artists have died that way. Tons of it's what war does. It it takes these people who could be artists and audience, or contemporaries, people, common human beings, and teaches them that they need to murder each other wholesale. Like it's as chaotic and senseless and as close to hell as you could possibly get. But I don't want to keep going on about the one poem, so I'll read this one. If you've never read this, is Kipling. It's called "If." It's just a really great poem. It's way less sad. but an incredible amount of beauty in it as well. If you can keep your head when all about you are losing theirs and blaming it on you, if you can trust yourself when all men doubt you, but make allowance for their doubting too, if you can wait and not be tired of waiting or being lied about, don't deal in lies, or being hated, don't give way to hating, and yet don't look too good nor talk too wise. If you can dream and not make your dreams your master, if you can think and not make thoughts your aim, if you can meet with triumph and disaster and treat those two impostors just the same, if you can bear to hear the truth you've spoken, twisted by knaves to make a trap for fools, or watch the things you gave your life to broken and stoop and build them up with worn out tools. If you can make one heap of all your winnings and risk it on one turn of pitch and toss and lose and start again at your beginnings and never breathe a word about your loss, if you can force your heart and nerve and sinew to serve your turn long after they are gone, and so hold on when there is nothing in you except the will which says to them, hold on. If you can talk with crowds and keep your virtue, or walk with kings, nor lose the common touch, if neither foes nor loving friends can hurt you, if all men count with you, but none too much, if you can fill the unforgiving minute with 60 seconds worth of distance run, yours is the earth and everything that's in it, and which is more, you'll be a man, my son. So beautiful. If you've never read that poem, read it. Keep reading it. I'll read it as long as I'm alive. It's so beautiful. Just that's what the best art does. It's not about a great moment. It's not about a great ending or even a great story. It's about genius and bringing it on again and again and again. Just tearing up the page with excellence. So here's another one because we're all over the place already. So let's just keep going. This is from John Milton's Paradise Lost. Milton is a very complicated historical figure. Oliver Cromwell, who's well hated in Ireland for good reason, and he was one of this guy's good buddies. But it doesn't change this guy's gift, which again, just like the other guys, another thing, I had a teacher who said, I'm not even sure if she was saying this firsthand or if she had heard it from someone else, but she said, boy, when Milton plays, a lot of poets play instruments, but Milton just plays the whole organ, and that's really what he does with the sounds. All right, so this is from Book 4 of Paradise Lost, and we're 285. And I'm just going to start on this random line. It's in the middle of a sentence. But from this Assyrian garden. So this is Satan coming upon Adam and Eve in paradise. From this Assyrian garden where the fiend so undelighted all delight, all kind of living creatures new to sight and strange, to a far nobler shape, erect and tall, godlike erect, with native honor clad, in naked majesty seemed lords of all, and worthy seemed, for in their looks divine the image of their glorious Maker shone, truth, wisdom, sanctitude, severe and pure, severe, but in true filial freedom placed, whence true authority in men, though both not equal as their sex, not equal seemed, for contemplation he and valor formed, For softness she, and sweet attractive grace. He for God only, she for God in him. His fair large front, and eye sublime declared, absolute rule, and hyacinth locks round from his parted forelock manly hung clustering, but not beneath his shoulders broad, she as a veil down to the slender waist. Her unadorned golden tresses wore dishevelled, but in wanton ringlets waved, as the vine curls her tendrils, which implied subjection, but required with gentle sway, and by her yielded, by him best received, yielded with coy submission, modest pride, and sweet reluctant, amorous delay. Nor these mystery, or nor these nor those mysterious parts were then concealed. Then was not guilty shame, dishonest shame of nature's works, honor dishonorable, sin bred. How have ye troubled all mankind with shows instead, mere shows of seeming pure, and banished from man's life his happiest life, simplicity and spotless innocence. So pass they naked on, nor shun the sight of God or angel, for they thought no ill. So hand in hand they passed, the loveliest pair that ever since in love's embraces met. Oh my God, Luna. Excuse me. Baby girl, you're killing me. So she's sitting on my lap and just completely scratching up my legs. She's a very good cat, though. I love you. All right. Where the hell was I? Simplicity and spotlessness, so passed they naked on, nor shunned the sight of God or angel, for they thought no ill. So hand in hand they passed, the loveliest pair that ever since in love's embraces met. Adam, the goodliest man of men since born, his sons, the fairest of her daughters Eve, under the tuft of shade that on a green stood whispering soft by a fresh fountain side. They sat them down, and after no more toil of their sweet gardening labor than sufficed to recommend cool zephyr, and make ease more easy, wholesome thirst and appetite. More grateful to their superfruits they fell, nectarine fruits, which the compliant boughs yielded them sidelong as they sat reclined on the soft downy bank, damasked with flowers the savory pulp they chew, and in the rind, still as they thirsted, scoop the brimming stream. Nor gentle purpose, nor endearing smiles wanted, nor youthful dalliance, as beseems fair couple, linked in happy nuptial league, alone as they. About them, frisking played all beasts of the earth, sense wild, and of all chase, in wood or wilderness, forest or den, sporting the lion ramped, and in his paw dandled the kid. Bears, tigers, ounces, pards, gamboled before them, the unwieldy elephant, to make them mirth, used all this might, and wreathed his lithe proboscis. Close the serpent sly insinuating wove the Gordian twine, his braided twain, and his fatal guile gave proof unheeded. Others on the grass couched, and now filled with pasture, gazing sat, or bedward ruminating. For the sun declined, was hasting now with prone career to the ocean isles, and in the ascending scale of heaven and stars that usher evening rose, when Satan's sullen gaze, as first he stood, scarce thus, at length failed, speech, speech recovered, sad. Oh, hell! What do mine eyes with grief behold? Into our room of bliss, thus high advanced, creatures of other mould, earth-born perhaps, not spirits, yet to heavenly spirits bright, little inferior, whom my thoughts pursue with wonder, and could love so lively shines in them divine resemblance, and such grace, the hand that formed them on their shape hath poured, ah, gentle pair, ye little think how nigh your change approaches, when all these delights will vanish and deliver ye to woe. Just reminds me of two things. People criticize me and they say he was of the devil's party and didn't know it. The truth is, we're all of the devil's party, and that's why he was able to uh, represent Milton Satan as such an awesome character. I think Ahab from Moby Dick, you do not have Ahab without Milton Satan. Um, Also, pretty sure he came after Shakespeare. I know they wrote in the same century, but yeah, I'm pretty sure Milton wrote after Shakespeare. Um, Definitely some inspiration going on there. You know, Iago, Macbeth, King Lear, and Hamlet. But hold on, let me get to this one. Okay, yeah, here we go. This is the start of book 5. Now morn her rosy steps in the eastern clime, advancing, sowed the earth with orient pearl, when Adam waked, so custom for his sleep was airy light from pure digestion bred, and temperate vapors bland, which the only sound of leaves and fuming rills, Aurora's fan, lightly dispersed, and the shrill matin song of birds on every bough, so much the more his wonder was to find unwakened Eve, with tresses discomposed and glowing cheek, as though in quiet rest. He, on his side, leaning half raised, with looks of cordial love, hung over her enamored, and beheld beauty, which whether waking or asleep, shot forth peculiar graces. Then with voice mild, as when Zephyrus on Flora breathes, her hand soft touching whispered thus, awake, my fairest, my espoused, my latest found, heaven's last, best gift, my ever new delight. Awake, the morning shines, and the fresh field calls us. We lose the prime, to mark how spring, our tended plants, how blows. The citron grove, what drops of myrrh, and what the balmy reed, how nature paints her colors, how the bee sits on the bloom, extracting liquid sweet. Such whispering waked her, but with startled eye. So I don't want to read Paradise Lost all night, but read it and just listen to the sounds. Like the guy is constantly reconstructing and deconstructing. It's hard to comprehend it. That he'll use something and he'll just constantly give you back the sounds, reorder them, the repetition, everything about it is just a level of excellence that's very, very rare at the time. Probably, well, I mean, there already was Shakespeare, so you had Hamlet, and King Lear, and those plays I mentioned are all excellent. Uh, all right, so what's next? Oh my god, I should really be standing to do this. My back is just. Ugh. Okay, so what is next? We've got Hawthorne, we've got a bunch of Victorian poems. We got Walt Whitman. All right, let's do Walt Whitman because there's a handful of good poems that are also pretty short that I really want to do. But let me just do. All right. Okay. When I heard the learned astronomer. When I heard the learned astronomer, when the proofs, the figures, were ranged in columns before me. When I was shown the charts and diagrams to add, divide, and measure them. When I, sitting, heard the astronomer where he lectured with much applause in the lecture room, how soon, unaccountable, I became tired and sick, till rising and gliding out, I wandered off by myself in the mystical moist night air, and from time to time looked up in perfect silence at the stars. I love Walt Whitman. I'm not a very fast reader, and I think that's the other thing that people hate about books, that you're told to read a certain amount at a time, and it's demanding. And poetry is the exact opposite. It's about slowing down. It's about listening to it and letting the pauses and letting yourself feel it, um, letting it come alive for you. All right, this is another great one. I don't even know how long ago I heard this one. I hear America singing. I hear America singing the varied carols I hear, those of mechanics, each one singing his as it should be, blithe and strong, the carpenter singing his as he measures his plank or beam, the mason singing his as he makes ready for work, or leaves off of or leaves off work, the boatman singing what belongs to him in his boat, the deckhand singing on the steamboat deck, the shoemaker singing as he sits on his bench, the hatter singing as he stands, the woodcutter's song, the ploughboy's on his way in the morning, or at noon, intermission, or at sundown, the delicious singing of the mother, or of the young wife at work, or of the girl sewing or washing, each singing what belongs to him or her, and to none else. The day what belongs to the day. At night the party of young fellows robust, friendly, singing with open mouths their strong melodious songs. Um, if you've never read, pretty much all his poems are pretty damn good. But Leaves of Grass, he was self-published in 1855, is incredible. The preface too is just has such a I don't know, it's really without equal. Actually, I don't want to just get too lost on that. Um, should I do this one? I was thinking of doing Crying of Lot 49, which, if you've never read Pynchon, that's what he does in terms of taking just art and just like hitting you with it, just like really like throwing their absolute best at the wall every time, and just uh, you know it transforms as you're reading it, as you reread it. The meanings are just so multiple. There's so much varied beauty to it. Oh my god. Oh my god, hold on. I gotta take a break and stretch. Wait 1 minute. Oh, excuse me, Luna. Entertain everybody. Excuse me. Okay. All right, Larry. Stay over there this time, okay? Because just start cramping up. All right. Here we go. Also, I'd like to thank Pete for getting me this shirt. I love it. Um, Final Fantasy 3, just an awesome game. All right, so this one's pretty great. It's also hilarious. It's from Thomas Pynchon's Gravity's Rainbow. It's called Doper's Dream. It's a song that character Pig Bodine is first seen in this book, and he's singing it loud and proud. He says, sits an American sailor with an orangutan look to him in 3/4 time in shit kicking style. He is singing the Doper's Dream. Last night I dreamed I was plugged right in to a bubbling hookah so high, when all of a sudden some Arab genie jump up just a wink in his eye. I'm here to obey all your wishes, he told me. As for words, I was trying to grope. Good buddy, I cried, you could surely oblige me by turning me on to some dope. With a big fat smile, he took a hold of my hand, and we flew down the sky in a flash. And the first thing I saw in the land where he took me was a whole solid mountain of hash. All the trees was a bloomin' with pink and purple pills, where the Romhiller River flowed by to the magic mushrooms as wild as a rainbow, so pretty that I wanted to cry. All the girls come to greet us, so sweet in slow motion, morning glories woven into their hair, bringing great big handfuls of snowy cocaine, all their dope they were eager to share. Well, we dallied for days, just a ballin' and smokin' in the flowering Panama red, just piggin' on peyote and nutmeg tea, and those brownies so kind to your head. Now I could have passed that good time forever, and I really was fixin' to stay. But you know that Genie turned out to be a narco man, and he busted me right where I lay. And he took me back to this cold, cold world. Now my prison's wherever I be, and I dream of the days back in Doper land, and I wonder will I ever be free. I mean, that's why Pynchon's the best, is because he's hilarious. But he also has, he also has this gift that's totally unparalleled. And when I first started reading, should I read it again? Read Hart Crane's. No, I'll read one Hart Crane poem. The bridge, really quick. It's just a quick introduction to everything Pynchon, and basically that's. Oh God. Oh. So. This is a whale. So I'll read the bridge quick, and then we'll start on Pynchon because I think he was very heavily influenced by this. So it's probably my favorite poem, at least it is at this moment. How many dawns, chill from his rippling rest, the seagull's wings shall dip and pivot him, shedding white rings of tumult, building high over the chain bay water's liberty. Then, with inviolate curve, forsake our eyes, as apparitional as sails that cross some page of figures to be filed away, till elevators drop us from our day. Excuse me. I think of cinemas, panoramic slates with multitudes bent towards some flashing scene, never disclosed but hastened to again, foretold to other eyes on the same screen. And thee across the harbor, silver paced as though the sun took step of thee, yet left some motion, ever unspent in thy stride. implicitly thy freedom staying thee. Out of some subway scuttle, cellar loft, a bedlamite speeds to thy parapets, tilting there momently, shrill shirt ballooning. A jest falls from the speechless caravan. Down wall, from girder into street, noon leaks, a rip tooth of the skies acetylene. All afternoon, the cloud-flown derricks turn, thy cables breathe the North Atlantic still, and obscure as that heaven of the Jews, thy guerdon, accolade thou dost bestow, of anonymity time cannot raise, vibrant reprieve and pardon thou dost show. O harp and altar of the fury fused, how could mere toil align thy choiring strings? Terrific threshold of the prophet's pledge, prayer of pariah and the lover's cry. Again the traffic lights that skim thy swift infractioned idiom, immaculate sigh of stars, beating thy path, condense eternity, and we have seen night lifted in thine arms. Under thy shadow by the piers I waited. Only in darkness is thy shadow clear. The city's fiery parcels all undone. Already snow submerges an iron year. O sleepless as the river under thee, vaulting the sea, the prairie's dreaming sod, unto us lowliest, sometimes sweep, descendant of the curved ship, lend a myth to God. Every time I read this poem, I get something new out of it. But I was just thinking, that part where he says, "O harp and altar of the fury fused, how could mere toil align thy choiring strings?" So he has the part where he's kind of teasing you with that G sound, that ringing that he'll give you with strings. Um, and says, "How could mere toil align thy choiring strings?" Again, not giving it to you completely, but just stressing and repeating that sound. And that G that is essential to the ringing of music, and just full of just these unforgettable imagery, and that's really what makes the difference between good poetry and bad poetry. It's that bad poetry is just not memorable. It's and I'm not saying it's not worth reading. You know, Plenty of stuff is worth reading. Um, Tons of things can give you joy, and just because I'm trying to focus on things that uh, find to be at a certain level right now doesn't mean I don't love all kinds of books and all kinds of poems. I like talking about this stuff because it's above me. I don't completely understand all of it, and I love it all. The humor to it, the beauty, the sadness, and just the absolute genius of these artists using their gift to the fullest extent and having faith in themselves to write something that people would probably, like Gravity's Rainbow is almost 800 pages. And, I love the author. And the first time I looked at it, I was just like, what the hell? It just like seemed like, uh, but that's the same thing like with Walt Whitman. You got to take your time with it. And if you don't, then you're going to suffer, like it's the artist, you have to meet great art at its own terms. If you're reading it for information, like you would you know, uh, a scientific book, and you're smart enough to understand it, you can absorb it pretty quickly. But not the same with art. You have to experience it. It's like tell someone to read Shakespeare. The smartest, the best person at reading in general could read it quicker than everyone else, but to sit there and see the man on the stage telling you what it's like to be a human being, you can't rush that. It's just a creation. So let me say, all right. So I've looked online, and a lot of people, you know, this book, Crying of Lot 49, I keep seeing different things where people call it like a hippie book. Keep people just completely misunderstand what he's doing. They don't see him in competition with Shakespeare and with Hart Crane and with Fitzgerald, even. Like so the Crying of Lot 49. Um, if you've never read it, it's about its purest form. At its purest form is about a stamp collection. It's about a man who's died, and he leaves his ex-girlfriend to execute his will. And we never meet the man in person in the story. The story takes place after he's dead. We get like one or two little things that aren't really that helpful for deciding who this person was, other than that he liked to imitate other people. And the Crying of Lot 49 is the auctioning of Lot 49, which is his stamp collection. And the stamp collection has it's huge. The guy was a millionaire. He loved the stamps. He would just stare at them for hours. And one of the few descriptions we get of it is that Oedipa felt that she was in competition with the stamps for his attention, and she starts to identify with Lot 49, seeing that they were both cheated by death of whatever attention he could have given either of them. She's married, by the way, so it's not it's kind of a complicated book. But her husband is he's a character, and everyone in this book is a character. There's not a single non-memorable thing happens in it. It's incredibly dense, and there are just multiple meanings on it. So I'm just gonna start reading it, and take a big sip of tea. Damn, that's good. All right. So remember what I said already about Melville, Moby Dick. They're creating a stage in your mind. They're not just trying to tell you, a really good story they thought of. They're doing that too, but they want to build something that is going to keep giving. Um, the Crying of Lot 49. 1. One summer afternoon, Mrs. Oedipa Moss came home from a Tupperware party whose hostess had put perhaps too much kitsch in the fondue, to find that she, Oedipa, had been named executor, or she supposed executrix, of the estate of one Pierce Inverarity, a California real estate mogul who had once lost $2 million in his spare time, but still had assets numerous and tangled enough to make the job of sorting it all out more than honorary. Oedipa stood in the living room, stared at the greenish dead eye of the TV tube, spoke the name of God, tried to feel as drunk as possible, but this did not work. She thought of a hotel room in Mazatlan whose door had just slammed, it seemed forever. Waking up 200 birds down in the lobby, a sunrise over the library slope at Cornell University that nobody out on it had seen because the slope faces west. A dry, disconsolate tune from the fourth movement of the Bartok Concerto for Orchestra. A whitewashed bust of Jay Gould that Pierce kept over the bed on a shelf so narrow for it she'd always had the hovering fear it would someday topple on them. Was that how he died, she wondered among dreams, crushed by the only icon in the house? That only made her laugh out loud and helpless. You're so sick, Oedipa, she told herself, or the room, which knew. The letter was from the law firm of Warp Wistful, Kubitschek and McNingus of Los Angeles, and signed by somebody named Metzger. It said Pierce had died back in the spring, and they'd only now found the will, and then only just now found the will. Metzger was to act as co-executor and special counsel in the event of any involved litigation. Oedipa had been named also to execute the will in a codicil dated a year ago. She tried to think back to whether anything unusual had happened around then. Through the rest of the afternoon, through her trip to the market in downtown Kinneret among the pines to buy ricotta and listen to the muzak, today she came through the bead curtain entrance, around bar 4 of the Fort Wayne Settecento Ensemble's Vivorium, recording of the Vivaldi kazoo concert. Boyd Beaver, soloist. All right, just let's slow down, because the first time I literally read that, I thought it was meant to symbolize somebody who had mental illness, because obviously it ends with the character saying that she's sick to an empty room, and he also tells you that the room is aware. Probably because she's left traces or impressions on the room of her sickness, of the fact that she's a mentally ill person. Aren't we all? So one summer afternoon, Mrs. Oedipa Maas, her name, Oedipa Maas, to people who read, I was actually mentioning Sophocles before, because the poem Dover Beach had it, Oedipa, Oedipus Rex. So a character who's tragically finds out that he has murdered his father before the beginning of the play, and finds out that he has also married his mother. So what does Oedipa's name mean? It has, like everything in this poem, it has a lot of different meanings. But incest is actually kind of a big part of this. It's a big part of humanity. The fact that we're all changelings for each other. The fact that we're under the impression of our separateness when in fact we probably aren't. It's an impression, but just like the characters in a play, they believe themselves separate, but that doesn't make them separate. They're all connected with the thing that made them. And like in other things, the room itself is alive. But this is what I think her name means, because at its core, the book is about death, and all of Pynchon's books are to some extent about the transience of life, for sure. It's a theme that definitely comes across again and again and again in Gravity's Rainbow and in Crying of Lot 49. And her name, as she's called, is Oedipa, but she's not usually called that. She's either called Miss Moss or Mrs. Moss. And both of those things mean the same thing. That she literally misses mass. Like the um, the form of matter that makes up all of us. She's she's simmering, she's decaying like all of us. And the book is called Crying, so she's the one who's gets to be sorrowful for it. So yeah, she misses mass, and she's going to understand through the poem what entropy is, and what basically that is. It's the irreversible process that all things will be lost. Everything shares the same fate. There's the post horn on the front to be filtered and ground up and dispersed together in he calls it a salad of despair in a couple pages. Oh my god. So the book is called Crying. and it's also called Lot 49. The way I've come to understand, and I've read this book, I don't know, probably about 6 times. When he wants you to make an association, he starts carpet bombing it with symbols that are making supposed to remind you of something. So if he's uh, like we were just talking about, to listen to the music today, in parentheses, today she came through the bead curtain entrance around bar 4 of the Fort Wayne Settecento Ensemble's Variori, Variorium recording of the Vivaldi Kazoo Concerto, Boyd Beaver soloist. She's really not doing much with her life. Then through the sun gathering of her marjoram and the sweet basil from the herb garden, reading of book reviews in the latest Scientific American, into the layering of lasagna, garlicking of a bread, tearing up of romaine leaves, eventually, oven on, into the mixing of Twilight's whiskey sours against the arrival of her husband, Wendell Mucho Moss, from work. She wondered. He repeats the word wondered. Just like with the other poems, they want you to be with them. They want you to stay with them and take your time, experience what the story is. Not just read it, not just take it in. They want you to experience it like you're watching a play. Shuffling back through a fat deck full of days which seemed, wouldn't she be the first to admit it, more or less identical, or all pointing the same way, subtly, like a conjurer's deck, any odd one readily clear to a trained eye. It took her to the middle of Huntley and Brinkley to remember that last year, at 3 or so one morning, there had come this long distance call, from where she would never know, unless now he'd left a diary, by a voice beginning in heavy Slavic tones as second secretary of the Transylvanian consulate looking for an escaped bat. You're crazy if you think this isn't going to get weirder. Modulated to comic Negro, then on to a hostile Pachuco dialect, full of chingas and mariconis, then a Gestapo officer asking her in shrieks did she have any relatives in Germany, and finally his Lamont Cranston voice, the one he talked in all the way down to Mazatlan. Pierce, please, she managed to get in. I thought we had, but Margot, earnestly, I've just come from Commissioner Weston, and that old man in the funhouse was murdered by the same blowgun that killed Professor Quackenbush. Or something, it reads, after his quote. So that's his longest line in the story, and we don't know what the hell. He's like the narrator is already telling you that might not have been it. But if you don't know, the reason he's Lamont Cranston is the Shadow, who's a famous radio voice, the most famous radio character ever. Um, yeah, easy to say because of how much radio was used by then. The audience size for the Shadow would have eclipsed anything today. You know, there has not been a movie that would have been seen by as many people, in theaters as, just a weekly broadcast of The Shadow because people listen all over, in their cars, everyone gathered at night. The competition for entertainment wasn't, you know, everyone listened to this thing. But another thing is that it's a convoluted character. I don't want to get too hung up on The Shadow, but Lamont Cranston is the billionaire who is secretly the Shadow, just like Bruce Wayne is secretly Batman. People don't know actually that uh, there's, I mean, a lot of people do, that Batman is heavily, heavily inspired by the Shadow. Bruce Wayne is the answer to Lamont Cranston. He's the billionaire playboy who's at night hunts down evildoers. And even in the beginning, both of them, they were kind of uh, symbols of God's justice. They murdered and dragged to hell, basically. Striking real fear in the hearts of criminals. So yeah, they. But also Lamont Cranston was voiced by a bunch of different people. Like first Orson Welles. I don't remember who, but the rotation constantly changed. It started, I think, in the 30s or 40s, but up into the 60s, there were still shadow broadcasts going on. Obviously by someone different. And I think the longest anyone ever did the voice was like 11 or 12 years. So reading this in 64, we have no idea what Lamont Cranston he's impersonating. Just the shadow, I guess. Continuing. For God's sake, she said. Mucho had rolled over and was looking at her. Why don't you hang up on him? Mucho suggested sensibly. She doesn't get to respond. So, I heard that, Pierce said. It's time. I think it's time Wendell Moss had a little visit from the shadow. Silence, positive and thorough, fell. So it was the last of his voices she ever heard. Lamont Cranston. That phone line could have pointed any direction, been any length. Its quiet ambiguity shifted over, in the months after the call, to what had been revived. Memories of his face, body, things he'd given her, things she had now and then pretended not to have heard him say. It took him over to the verge of being forgotten. The shadow waited a year before visiting, but now there was Metzger's letter. Had Pierce called last year, then to tell her about this codicil? Or had he decided on it later, somehow because of her annoyance and Mucho's indifference? She felt exposed, finessed, put down. She had never executed a will in her life, didn't know where to begin, didn't know how to tell the law firm in LA that she didn't know where to begin. Mucho, baby, she cried in an access of helplessness. Mucho Mas, home, bounded through the screen door. Today was another defeat, he began. Let me tell you, she also began, but let Mucho go first. He was a disc jockey who worked further along the peninsula and suffered regular crisis of conscience about his profession. I don't believe in any of it, Ed, he could usually get out. I try. I truly can't. Way down there, further down perhaps than she could reach, so that such times often brought her near panic. It might have been the sight of her so about to lose control that seemed to bring him back up. You're too sensitive. Yeah. There was so much else she ought to be saying also, but this was what came out. It was true anyway. For a couple of years, he'd been a used car salesman and so hyper aware of what that profession had come to mean that working hours were exquisite torture to him. Mucho shaved his upper lip every morning 3 times with, 3 times against the grain to remove the remotest breath of a mustache. New blades, he drew blood invariably, but kept at it. Brought all natural shoulder suits, then went to a tailor to have the lapels made yet more abnormally narrow. On his hair, used only water, combing it like Jack Lemmon to throw them further off. The sight of sawdust, even pencil shavings, made him wince, his own kind being known to use it for hushing sick transmissions. And though he dieted, he could still not, as Oedipa did, use honey to sweeten his coffee, for like all things viscous, it distressed him, recalling too poignantly what is often mixed with motor oil to ooze dishonest into gaps between piston and cylinder wall. He walked out of a party one night because somebody used the word cream puff. It seemed maliciously in his hearing. The man, refugee Hungarian pastry cook, talking shop. But there was your mucho, thin-skinned. So his name's Wendell. But again, mucho mas is his thing. And later on at the end of the story, Mucho's going to lose this stuff about him, the things that bother him, especially what we're about to read. He starts taking LSD, and the things about his personality start to slip away. And that's, I mean, the guy's a freak. Like, but that's, that's who he is. And, we would think that they're, curing, you know, um, well, I don't want to get too far ahead of it, but, but it's just hilarious. Like it could not be more bizarre. But he's, all these things, like coming at like Jack Lemmon to throw them further off. Who? Like the people buying the cars? He wants to look like Jack Lemmon to, um, like all things viscous. It distressed him. Well, let me get to this next chapter. Excuse me, this next paragraph. Yet at least he had believed in the cars, maybe to excess. How could he not? Seeing people poorer than him come in. Negro, Mexican, cracker, a parade, 7 days a week, bringing the most god-awful of trade-ins, motorized metal extensions of themselves, of their families, and what their whole lives must be like. Out there, so naked for anybody, a stranger like himself, to look at. Frame cockeyed, rusty underneath, fender repainted in a shade just off enough to depress the value, if not Mucho himself. Inside, smelling hopelessly of children, supermarket booze, 2, sometimes 3 generations of cigarette smokers, or only of dust. And when the cars were swept out, you had to look at the actual residue of these lives. There was no way of telling what things had been truly refused, when so little he supposed came by that, out of fear most of it had to be taken and kept, and what had simply, perhaps tragically, been lost. Clipped coupons promising savings of 5 or 10 cents, trading stamps, pink flyers advertising specials at the markets, butts, tooth-shy combs, help-wanted ads, yellow pages torn from the phone book, rags of old underwear, or dresses that already were period costumes, for wiping your breath off the inside of the windshield so that you could see whatever it was, a movie, a woman, or car you coveted, a cop who might pull you over just for drill, all the bits and pieces coated uniformly, like a salad of despair, in a gray dressing of ash, condensed exhaust, dust, body waste. It made him sick to look, but he had to look. If it had been an outright junkyard, probably he could have stuck things out, made a career, the violence that had caused each wreck being infrequent enough, far enough away from him to be miraculous, as each death, up to the moment of our own, is miraculous. But the endless rituals of trade-in, week after week, never got as far as violence or blood, and so were too plausible for the impressionable Mucho to take for long. Even if enough exposure to the unvarying gray sickness had somehow managed to immunize him, he could still never accept the way each owner, each shadow, filed in only to exchange a dented, malfunctioning version of himself for another, just as featureless, automotive projection of somebody else's life, as if it were the most natural thing. To Mucho it was horrible, endless, convoluted incest. Oedipa couldn't understand how he could still get so upset, even now. By the time he'd married her, he'd already been 2 years at the station, KCUF, fuck spelled backwards, and the lot on the pallid, roaring arterial was far behind him, like the Second World or Korean Wars were for older husbands. Maybe, God help her, he should have been in a war. Japs in trees, krauts in tiger tanks, gooks with trumpets in the night. He might have forgotten sooner than whatever it was about the lot that had stayed so alarmingly with him. Keep repeating the word lot, with him for going on 5 years. 5 years. You comfort them when they wake, pouring sweat, or crying out in the language of bad dreams. Yes, you hold them. They calm down. One day they lose it. She knew that. But when was Mucho going to forget? She suspected the disc jockey spot, which he'd got through his good buddy, the KCUF advertising manager, who'd visited the lot once a week. The lot being a sponsor was a way of letting the top 200 and even the news copy that came jabbering out of the machine, all the fraudulent dream of teenage appetites, be a buffer between him and that lot. He had believed too much in the lot. He believed not at all in the station. Yet to look at him now, in the twilight living room, gliding like a large bird in an updraft toward the sweating shaker full of booze, smiling out of his fat vortex ring's center, you'd think all was flat, calm, cold, serene, until he opened his mouth. um, this is a really big judgment against Oedipa. This idea, and she's just a frustrated wife because she doesn't understand what it is about the lot. And again, just keep saying lot. This is what the story is about, and this is what poetry is about. That line, never send to know for whom the bell tolls. It tolls for thee. Every man's death, every loss. If a cloud be washed away by the sea, Europe is the less. This is what the story is about. The lot is the entire planet, and the stamp collection lot is the same thing. It's all of human history through the postal system. What I was saying is that she says he should have been in a war, the Second World War or Korean Wars, to help him get over his fear of death. It's just like, like you understand because you're just so taken aback by like who the hell is this guy? He's just a strange character, but imagine that, imagine thinking that someone else should have been involved in those those nightmares, like krauts and tiger tanks. There's going to be a description later on of what World War II is, and Oedipa doesn't get it. That's probably what the story is that she doesn't get it, and she really doesn't care so much. She does to an extent, and she will come to a lot more in the story. But she doesn't understand what there's a really incredible description later on. Where is that one? Excuse me. So there's an odd connection. He says all the bits and pieces of the life coded uniformly. That's what the car lot is all the things that are extensions of us are all constantly getting treated, and he thinks it's an endless convoluted incest. Calling back to Oedipa's name. Oedipa, is marries his mother. In some sense, we think that this Oedipa must have some association with incest as well. So she brings up the part about the war. Watch when we get our only description in this. Gravity's Rainbow, again, Pynchon's next novel, is all about World War II. And his novel before this one was also about World War II as well, and also the genocide of the Heroes that the Germans, uh, you know, basically exterminated the Herero people. I think in 1904 was the first genocide of the 20th century, and there were plenty more after that. So later on in the story, she's going to be figuring out she's with Metzger, who's the lawyer, and they meet this guy named Tony Jaguar, who's another lawyer, and he's suing Pierce's estate. Um, oh, I'm sorry. No, Manny Depresso is the lawyer. Tony Jaguar is the guy who's representing him. Um, I'm sorry. Manny Depresso is representing Tony Jaguar, who's suing Pierce because he never paid him for bones that were fished out of, harvested them all from the bottom of Lago de Pieta. This is where these bones came from, okay? And again, Oedipus seems not to care. There's a part where she says, "I don't care what I don't care what what the bones were." It's just like, why not? Like, seems like it's pretty important, but I think that's the thing, is that she doesn't understand because she's ignorant of what entropy is and what the fact that everything together will be lost. But she's starting to, and that basically she's just ignorant, and it's not. Um, I don't. I don't know. It's weird to have read this book so many times, not really understand the character that you know the most about. She's very real, and you get it. But basically, that's a lot of American people. That really all people. They live in their own world, and try not to venture too far out because life's short, and it's very difficult for people to think of things without being obsessed with things. To be aware of something without being overly aware of something. So I think part of it is a fear of that. Back to the description, okay? So Pierce built this thing called Lake Inverarity, and at the bottom, it's basically, he's a real estate mogul. So he built this thing, and at the bottom of Pearson Lake Inverarity, he has, for scuba enthusiasts, he has real bones that are set in the scene of, I don't know, some kind of like pirate thing or whatever. Excuse me. But they're real human skeletons down there. And they're from World War II soldiers, American World War II soldiers that are underneath this lake. This is the description. And it's literally like, it's just an incredible gift for Pynchon as a writer. He's able to compress this it's basically a short story. It's a really tragic, beautiful, I mean, beautiful. I mean, in its terms of genius, it's very sad, and it's pretty grisly. So, about a company, said Manny Depresso, Lago de Pieta in Italy was near the Tyrrhenian coast, somewhere between Naples and Rome, and had been the scene of a now ignored, in 1943, tragic battle of attrition in a minor pocket developed during the advance on Rome. For weeks, a handful of American troops, cut off and without communications, huddled on the narrow shore of the clear and tranquil lake, while from the cliffs that tilted vertiginously down over the beach, Germans hit them day and night with plunging, enfilading fire. Enfilading is a tactical position where you have a clear shot as you possibly could. So these guys are just getting shot up on a plane, like just, there's lots of them, and they're just all getting, literally like fire, like they're being melted down basically, and they will be melted down. The water of the lake was too cold to swim. You died of exposure before you could reach any safe shore. There were no trees to build rafts with, no planes came over, except with the occasional stucco with strafing in mind. A nightmare. This is what she thinks, So maybe Mucho should have been involved in this. Just she doesn't get what war is. She clearly doesn't. It was remarkable that so few men held out so long. They dug in as far as the rocky beach would let them. They sent small raids up the cliffs that mostly never came back, but did succeed in taking out a machine gun once. Like, like they are fighting for their lives, and these guys are not giving up. They are fighting tooth and nail. Patrols looked for routes out, but those few that returned had found nothing. They did what they could to break out. Failing, they clung to life as long as they could, but they died, every one, dumbly, without a trace or a word. One day, the Germans came down from the cliffs, and their enlisted men put all the bodies that were on the beach into the lake, along with what weapons and other material were no longer of use to either side. Presently, the bodies sank and stayed where they were to the early 50s, when Tony Jaguar, who'd been a corporal in an Italian outfit attached to the German force at Lago di Pieta and knew about what was at the bottom, decided along with some colleagues to see what he could salvage. All they managed to come up with was bones. Out of some murky train of reasoning, which may have included the absurd fact that American tourists, beginning then to be plentiful, would pay good dollars for almost anything, and stories about Forest Lawn and the American cult of the dead, possibly some dim hope that Senator McCarthy and others of his persuasion in those days, having achieved a certain ascendancy over the rich Cretini from across the sea, would somehow refocus attention on the fallen of WW2, especially ones whose corpses had never been found. Out of some such labyrinth of assumed motives, Tony Jaguar decided he could surely unload his harvest of bones on some American someplace. Through his contacts in the family, known these days as Casa Nostra, the mafia, um, he was right. An import export firm bought the bones, sold them to a fertilizer enterprise, which may have used one or two femurs for laboratory tests, but eventually decided to phase entirely into menhaden instead, and transferred the remaining several tons to a holding company, which stored them in a warehouse outside Fort Wayne, Indiana, for maybe a year before Beaconsfield got interested. So they mentioned this. It's going to remind them, the group that's with them is the Paranoids, who are all supposed to be the Beatles. Really, just an American act that's impersonating the Beatles, and there are a ton of references throughout. But basically, that's what all of our fate basically is. Whatever the carbon that's making us up will get distributed throughout, and we're sharing the same fate that all of this will end someday. You know, that everything that we've built up. That same line from Ozmandias. Look on my works, ye mighty, and despair. That all of this gets lost. The beginning of Gravity's Rainbow. See, that's the weird thing is that people love Gravity's Rainbow because it is a really good book, but they somehow don't think Crying of Lot 49 is its equal, which it absolutely is. So, just real quick, it's the beginning of Gravity's Rainbow. A screaming comes across the sky. It has happened before, but there is nothing to compare it to now. You know, I might be getting too tired for this. But basically, that's the same kind of thing, is that these people who are getting rained on in London from the V 2 rockets from the Germans, their stories are too tragic. They're too numerous to be remembered. It's just such a constant occurrence. It's day and day. and it's all destined to be forgotten. We're all doomed to silence ultimately, and but we share that. That silence and that suffering is which from an individual standpoint seems like the lowest that a person can possibly be. Um, that we are all sharing it together. And what people define as God is this shared quality. So, in a way, it is God that all of our suffering and our shared compassion is that's what divinity is. Oh my God, I should really probably call it a night. Is there any other poems or anything I feel like reading before calling it a night? Uh, that's Tennyson. Oh, let's do this one. Um, it's a great one called Porphyria's Lover by Robert Browning. It was written in 1834, so pretty close on the heels of Keats and those romantic guys. But this guy is not romantic at all. Um, Robert Browning, I think one of the best poets ever, wrote in these dramatic soliloquies. So basically, you hear it, and a lot of times you're supposed to hear a character talking. In the same way Edgar Allan Poe's short stories kind of feel that way, but this is all done in poetic form. So this is one I read, and I've always kind of loved it because it's haunting and it's good for it's after midnight. We can bring a little horror into this. Just thinking about how you know there's a darkness to the art. It's just not one dimensionally joyful. I love poems that are one dimensionally joyful too. Um, but it just so happens that the writers that I love tend to, be masters of tragedy as well. And that depth of meaning is what I'm kind of uh, focusing on tonight. Um, I think tomorrow I'm just going to be reading this one, is Mason and Dixon, which is Pynchon's fifth book, and it's really, really good. Um, it's about community, and it has a lot of the same themes, but there's also just like a total barrage of like this. The thing I love about Pynchon is the gift that he's capable of being the funniest around, and also capable of making you feel it. Of making things come alive, and showing you something that's that's beautiful in all dimensions of beautiful, the terrible and the joyful. You know what? Instead of doing the Robert Browning thing, because there's a lot of different ones, I'll save that for another night. Uh, One second. Okay, let's do this one. All right, I read this in the other one, but um, I think it kind of fits in really well with everything I've been talking about. Um, should space this out better, but I'm still new to this, so I'm gonna put timestamps in because I don't want anyone to be listening to 2 hours of it's this is a lot. I'm I'm kind of spent after this much time doing this, so Just going to end with this poem. It's called Go to the Limits of Your Longing. God speaks to each of us as he makes us, then walks with us silently out of the night. These are the words we dimly hear. You, sent out beyond your recall, go to the limits of your longing. Embody me. Flare up like a flame and make big shadows I can move in. Let everything happen to you. Beauty and terror. Just keep going. No feeling is final. Don't let yourself lose me. Nearby is the country they call life. You will know it by its seriousness. Give me your hand. So, go back by Rilke, which another neat tie-in. I get that I want to do tie-ins from writer to writer, not just bouncing around as chaotically as I'm sometimes doing. But Gravity's Rainbow, Rilke is a very important author to it. It's referenced all the time, and sometimes in the original German too, which I don't speak it, so makes it a little tricky. But I love this poem. I really, like that you're supposed to let everything happen to you, beauty and terror, but just don't give up. Don't let go uh, of what you are. Keep having faith in your creation because you, as a creation, are God, and you should keep having faith in it. Trust, not fear, not despair, not paranoia. Just trust in who you are, and do your best. Do what makes sense, but don't let yourself act out of fear. Don't let yourself act out of, um, you know. Okay, so God speaks to each of us as He makes us, then walks with us silently out of the night. These are the words we dimly hear. So the rest of the poem will be God talking to us and um, basically saying that God's inhabiting us. We are God, every single one of us. And what we make is an extension of ourselves, which is, since we're extensions of God, that is also extension of God. Like the bridge, like Gravity's Rainbow, the rockets, that were raining death, like the atomic bomb. All of it is somehow an extension of the story, and everything together makes up um, God and reality. That I mean, what's the line? Strawberry fields forever. There's nowhere you're meant to be that isn't where you're meant to be. So just trust. Have faith for its own sake. Faith in yourself that you were made for a reason, and however you're made, whatever faults or difficulties you have, you were made right. Whatever we are is always with us. Trust that thing. It's always walking with us, sometimes silently, but these are the words we dimly hear. You, sent out beyond your recall, go to the limits of your longing. Embody me. Flare up like a flame and make big shadows I can move in. Testify to what you are as a member of the human race. There should be. I don't know. I think of it, as a kind of arrogant pride, especially dealing with, uh, what's going on right now with the world. We will get out of this. Like no matter what, there won't be there won't be the thing that completely wipes out humanity. We will always overcome as a species. we will never, there's something about us that is always going to, um, in some cases maybe like an arrogant pride, but I feel it in my core too, just like that, just like screw everything else. We're going in, like basically that we're just, whatever we're gonna do, and seeing the rapid communication and basically the entire world, people communicating as quickly as they can. And I'm not saying, you know, global governments like a more centralized thing. Those things lead to problems. Those things get in the way of communication. Like that's there's a reason America is the United States is still around and the USSR and the Nazis aren't, because we never went to down a dictatorial route, and we have gotten close. We have been, um, you know we have been victims in some cases, and we have let our disorder of our government create many, many victims around the world. I'm saying I'm tired. I'm like, literally, you're going to start talking about, uh, world history and politics now. Flare up like a flame and make big shadows I can move in. Let everything happen to you. Beauty and terror. Just keep going. No feeling is final. Don't let yourself lose me. Don't despair. Don't let your mind convince you that this is the end, that anything is the end, because life will happen until it's not. But don't don't lose it. Think about all the things that your body does, all the things that we have to just trust, like our hearts are going to keep beating, our blood's going to keep circulating, the right chemical things are going to create the exactly what our body needs. We're going to break down our food properly. Any one of these things, if it was up to me, if I was in charge of remembering and doing these things, and it would never happen. You know, anytime you try too hard, you overdo something, you're always screwing yourself, because when you're trying too hard, you're fearing, you're letting yourself um, start despairing. And you a lot of cases, that's it, is that you're trying too hard, and the despair is already kind of cutting your legs out from under you. Nearby is the country they call life. You will know it's by its seriousness. Give me your hand. It's from the Book of Hours. I haven't read nearly as much of Rilke. Rilke. I really wish I knew how to pronounce his name, but every poem I've read of his are, you know, absolutely gorgeous. And this one's is is really one of the best poems I've ever read. It just it 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 touches on such a deep, beautiful level. That just like just trust. Don't let yourself get overwhelmed. Don't let yourself, you know, don't deny fear, but don't become fear. You're not fear. You were never meant to be fear. You were meant to be you. And that's what he's saying. All right. Luna's asleep. Until next time, good night.